The Way Station. 1. A nursery rhyme had been playing itself throughout his mind all day, the maddening kind of thing that will not let go. The mocking ignores all commands of conscious mind to cease and desist. The rhyme was: the rain in Spain falls on the plain. There is joy and also pain, but the rain in Spain falls on the plain. There's a sheet, life stain, all the things we know will change, and all those things remain the same. But be ye mad or only sane, the rain in Spain falls on the plain. We walk in love but fly in chains, and the plains in Spain fall in the rain. He didn't know what a plane was in the context of the rhyme's last couplet, but he knew why the rhyme had occurred to him in the first place. There had been the recurring dream of his room in the castle and of his mother, who had sung it to him as he lay solemnly in the tiny bed by the window of many colors. She did not sing it at bedtime because all small boys born to the high speech must face the dark alone, but she sang it to him at nap times, and he could remember the heavy gray rain light that shivered into rainbows on the counterpane. He could feel the coolness of the room and the heavy warmth of blankets, love for his mother and her red lips, the haunting melody of the little nonsense lyric, and her voice. Now it came back maddeningly, like a dog chasing its own tail in his mind as he walked. All his water was gone, and he knew he was likely a dead man. He had never expected it to come to this, and he was sorry. Since noon he had been watching his feet rather than the way ahead. Out here even the devil grass had grown stunned and yellow. The hard pan had disintegrated in places to mere rubble. The mountains were not noticeably clearer, although 16 days had passed since he had left the hut of the last homesteader, a lonely, sane young man on the edge of the desert. He had a bird, the Gunslinger remembered, but he couldn't remember the bird's name. He watched his feet move up and down like heedles of a loom, listened to the nonsense rhyme sing itself into a pitiful garble in his mind, and wondered when he would fall down for the first time. He didn't want to fall, even though there was no one to see him. It was a matter of pride. A gunslinger knows pride, that invisible bone that keeps the neck stiff. What hadn't come to him from his father had been kicked into him by Court, a boy's gentleman if there was ever one. Court, yar, with his red bulb of a nose and his scarred face. He stopped and looked up suddenly. It made his head buzz, and for a moment his whole body seemed to float. The mountains dreamed against the far horizon. But there was something else up ahead, something much closer, perhaps only 5 miles away. He squinted at it, but his eyes were sandblasted and going glare-blind. He shook his head and began to walk again. The rhyme circled and buzzed. About an hour later he fell down and sicked his hands. He looked at the tiny beads of blood on his flaked skin with disbelief. The blood looked no thinner, it looked like any blood, now dying in the air. It seemed almost as smug as the desert. He dashed the drops away, hating them blindly. Smug? Why not? The blood was not thirsty. The blood was being served. The blood was being made sacrifice unto. Blood sacrifice. All the blood needed to do was run, and run, and run. He looked at the splotches that had landed on the hard pan and watched as they were sucked up with uncanny suddenness. How do you like that, blood? How does that suit you? Oh Jesus, I'm far gone. He got up, holding his hands to his chest, and the thing he'd seen earlier was almost in front of him, so close it made him cry out, a dust-choked croak. It was a building. No, 2 buildings, surrounded by a fallen rail fence. The wood seemed old, fragile, to the point of elvishness. It was wood being transmogrified into sand. One of the buildings had been a stable. The shape was clear and unmistakable. The other was a house, or an inn. The way station for a coach line. The tottering sand house, the wind had crushed the wood with grit until it looked like a sandcastle that the sun had bat upon at low tide and hardened to a temporary abode. cast a thin line of shadow, and someone sat in that shadow, leaning against the building. And the building seemed to lean with the burden of his weight. Him then, at last, the man in black. The gunslinger stood with his hands to his chest, unaware of his declamatory posture, and gawped. But instead of the tremendous winning excitement he had expected, or perhaps fear or awe, there was nothing but the dim, atavistic guilt for the sudden, raging hate of his own blood moments earlier and the endless ring around the rosy childhood song. The rain in Spain moved forward, drawing one gun, falls on the plain. He came the last quarter mile at jolting, flat-footed run, not trying to hide himself. There was nothing to hide behind. His short shadow raced him. He was not aware that his face had become a gray and dusty death mask of exhaustion. He was aware of nothing but the figure in the shadow. It did not occur to him until later that the figure might even have been dead. He kicked through one of the leaning fence rails. It broke into two without a sound, almost apologetically, and lunged across the dazzled and silent stable yard, bringing up the gun. You're covered, hands up, you whore son, you're... The figure moved restlessly and stood up. The gunslinger thought, my God, he's worn away to nothing. That's what's happened to him. Because the man in black had shrunk to full feet, and his hair had gone white. He paused, struck dumb, his head buzzing tunnelously. His heart was racing at lunatic race, and he thought, I'm dying right here. He sucked the white-hot air into his lungs and hung his head out for a moment. When he raised it again, he saw it wasn't the man in black, but a boy with sun-bleached hair, regarding him with eyes that did not even seem interested. The gunslinger stared at him blankly, then shook his head in negation. The boy survived his refusal to believe. He was a strong delusion. One wearing blue jeans with a patch on one knee and a plain brown shirt of rough weave. The gunslinger shook his head again and stared for the stable with his head lowered, gun still in hand. He couldn't think yet. His head was filled with motes and there was a huge, tremouring ache behind it. The inside of the stable was silent and dark, exploding with heat. The gunslinger stared around himself with huge floating wall eyes. He made a drunken about face and saw the boy standing in the ruined doorway, staring at him. The blade of pain slipped smoothly into his head, cutting from the temple to temple, dividing his brain like an orange. He reholstered the gun, swayed, put out his hands as if to ward off phantoms, and fell over on his face. 2. When he woke up, he was on his back and there was a pile of light, odorless hay beneath his head. The boy had not been able to move him, but he had made him reasonably comfortable. And he was cool. He looked down on himself and he saw that his shirt was dark and wet. He licked at his face and tasted water. He blinked at it. His tongue seemed to swell in his mouth. The boy was hunkered down beside him. When he saw the gunslinger's eyes open, he reached behind him and gave the gunslinger a dented tin can filled with water. He grasped it and with trembling hands allowed himself to drink a little, just a little. When that was down and sitting in his belly, he drank a little more. He then spilled the rest over his face and made shocked blowing noises. The boy's pretty lips curved in a solemn little smile. "Would you want something to eat, sir?" "Not yet," the gunslinger said. There was still a sick ache in his head from the sunstroke, and the water sat uneasily in his stomach, as if he did not want to know where to go. "Who are you?" "My name's John Chambers. You can call me Jake. I have a friend, well, sort of a friend, she works for us, who calls me Bama sometimes, but you can call me Jake." The gunslinger sat up, and the sick ache became hard and immediate. He leaned forward and lost a brief struggle with his stomach. "There's more," Jake said. He took the can and walked towards the rear of the stable. He paused and smiled back at the gunslinger uncertainly. The gunslinger nodded at him and then put his head down and propped it with his hands. The boy was well made, handsome, perhaps 10 or 11. There was a shadow of fear on his face, but that was all right. The gunslinger would have trusted him far less if the boy hadn't shown fear. A strange thumping hum began in the rear of the stable. The gunslinger raised his head alertly, hands going to the butt of his guns. The sound lasted for perhaps 15 seconds and then quit. The boy came back with a can. Filled now. The gunslinger drank, sparingly now, and this time it was a little better. The ache in his head was fading. "I didn't know what to do with you when you fell down," Jake said. "For a couple of seconds there, I thought you were gonna shoot me." "Maybe I was. I thought you were somebody else." "The priest?" The gunslinger looked up sharply. The boy studied him, frowning. "He camped in the yard. It was the house over there. Or maybe it was a depot. I didn't like him, so I didn't come out. He came in the night and went on the next day. I would have hidden from you, but I was sleeping when you came." He looked darkly over the gunslinger's head. "I don't like people. They fuck me up." "What did he look like?" The boy shrugged. "Like a priest. He was wearing black things." "A hood and a cassock?" "What's a cassock?" "A robe, like a dress." The boy nodded. "That's about right." The gunslinger leaned forward, and something in his face made the boy recoil a little. "How long? Tell me, for your father's sake." I... Patiently, the gunslinger said, "I'm not going to hurt you." "I don't know. I can't remember time. Every day is the same." For the first time, the gunslinger wondered, consciously, how the boy had come to this place, with dry and man-killing leagues of desert all around it. But he would not make this his concern, not yet at least. "Make your best guess, then. Long ago?" "No, not long. I haven't been here long." The fire lit in him again. He snatched up the can and drank from it, with hands that trembled the smallest bit. A fragment of the cradle song recurred, but this time, instead of his mother's face, he saw the scarred face of Alice, who had been his Jilly in the now defunct town of Tull. A week, 2, 3. The boy looked at him distractedly. "Yes." "Which?" "A week or 2. He looked aside, blushing a little. 3 poops ago. That's the only way I can measure things now. He didn't even drink. I thought he might be the ghost of a priest, like in the movie I once saw, only Zorro figured out it wasn't a priest at all, or a ghost rider either. He was just a banker who wanted some land because there was gold on it. Miss Shaw took me to see that movie. It was in Times Square." None of this made any sense to the gunslinger, so he didn't comment on it. "I was scared," the boy said. "I've been scared almost all the time." His face quivered like a crystal on the edge of the ultimate destructive high note. "He didn't even build a fire, he just sat there. I don't even know if he went to sleep." Closer. Closer than he had ever been, by the gods. In spite of the extreme dehydration, his hands felt faintly moist, greasy. "There's some dry meat," the boy said. "All right." The gunslinger nodded. "Good." The boy got up to fetch it, his knees popping slightly. He made a fine, straight figure. The desert had not yet sapped him. His arms were thin, but the skin, although tanned, had not dried and cracked. "He's got juice," the gunslinger thought. "Mayhaps some sand in his craw as well. Or he would have taken one of my guns and shot me right where I lay." Or perhaps the boy simply hadn't thought of it. The gunslinger drank from the can again. Sand in his craw or not, he didn't come from this place. Jake came back with a pile of dried jerky on what looked like a sun-scorched breadboard. The meat was tough, stringy, and salty enough to make the cankered lining of the gunslinger's mouth sing. He ate and drank until he felt lodgy, and then settled back. The boy ate only a little, picking at the dark strands with an odd delicacy. The gunslinger regarded him, and the boy looked back at him with candidly enough. "Where did you come from, Jake?" he asked finally. "I don't know." The boy frowned. "I did know. I knew where I came from, but it's all fuzzy now. Like a bad dream when you wake up. I have lots of bad dreams. Mrs. Shaw used to say it was because I watched too many horror movies on Channel 11. "What's a channel?" A wild idea occurred to him. "Is it like a beam?" "No, it's TV." "What's TV?" The boy touched his forehead. Pictures. Did someone tote you here? This Mrs. Shaw? No, the boy said. I was just here. Who is Mrs. Shaw? I don't know. Why did she call you Bama? I don't remember. You're not making any sense, the gunslinger said flatly. Quite suddenly, the boy was on the verge of tears. I can't help it. I was just here. If you asked me about TV and channels yesterday, I bet I still would have remembered. Tomorrow, I probably won't even remember I am Jake, not unless you tell me, and I won't be here, will you? You're going to go away and I'll starve because you ate up almost all my food, and I didn't ask to be here. I don't like it. It's spooky. Don't feel sorry for yourself. Make do. I didn't ask to be here, the boy repeated with bewildered defiance. The gunslinger ate another piece of the meat, chewing the salt out of it before swallowing. The boy had become part of it. The gunslinger was convinced he told the truth. He had not asked for it. It was too bad. He himself, he had asked for it. But he had not asked for the game to become this dirty. He had not asked to turn his guns on the townfolks of Tull. He had not asked to shoot Allie, with her sadly pretty face at the end marked by a secret she had finally asked to be let in on, using the word, that 19, like a key in a lock. He had not asked to be faced with the choice between duty and flat-out murder. It was not fair to ring in innocent bystanders and make them speak lines they didn't understand on strange stage. Allie, he thought. Allie was at least part of this world, in her own self-illusionary way. But this boy, this goddamn boy. Tell me what you can remember, he told Jake. It's only a little. It doesn't seem to make any sense anymore. Tell me, maybe I can pick up the sense. The boy thought about how to begin. He thought about it very hard. There was a place, the one before this one, a high place with lots of rooms, a patio where you could look at tall buildings and water. There was a statue that stood in the water. A statue in the water? Yes, a lady with a crown and a torch. I think a book. Are you making this up? I guess I might be, the boy said hopelessly. There were things to ride on in the streets, big ones and little ones. The big ones were blue and white, the little ones were yellow. A lot of yellow ones. I walked to school. There were cement paths beside the streets, windows to look in, and more statues wearing clothes. The statues sold the clothes. I know it sounds crazy, but the statues sold the clothes. The gunslinger shook his head and looked for a lie on the boy's face. He saw none. I walked to school, the boy repeated doggedly. And I had his eyes tilted closed and his lips moved gropingly, a brown book bag. I carried a lunch, and I wore, the groping again, agonizing groping, a tie. A cravat? I don't know. The boy's fingers made a slow, unconscious clinching motion at his throat, the gunslinger associated with hanging. I don't know, it's just all gone. He looked away. May I put you to sleep? The gunslinger asked. I'm not sleepy. I can make you sleepy, and I can make you remember. Doubtfully, Jake asked, How could you do that? With this. The gunslinger removed one of his shells from his gun belt and twirled it in his fingers. The movement was dexterous as flowing oil. The shells cartwheeled effortlessly from the thumb and index to the index and the second to the second and the ring to the ring and the pinky. It popped out of sight and reappeared, seemingly to float briefly, then reversed. The shell walked across the gunslinger's fingers. The fingers themselves marched as his feet had marched on his last mile to this place. The boy watched, his initial doubt first replaced with a plain delight, then raptness, then, by drawing blankness as he opened, his eyes slipped shut. The shell danced back and forth. Jake's eyes opened again, caught the steady, limpid movement between the gunslinger's fingers a little while longer, and then closed them once more. The gunslinger continued the "how can," but Jake's eyes did not open again. The boy breathed with slow and steady calmness. Did this have to be part of it? Yes, it did. There was a certain cold beauty to it, like the lacy fritterings that fringe hard blue ice packs. He once more seemed to hear his mother singing. Not the nonsense about the rain in Spain this time, but sweeter nonsense, coming from the great distance as he rocked on the rim to sleep. Baby bunting, baby dear, bring your basket here. Not for the first time the gunslinger tasted the smooth, loathing taste of soul sickness. The shell in his finger, manipulated with such unknown grace, was suddenly horrific, the spoor of a monster. He dropped it into his palm, made a fist, and squeezed it with painful force. Had it exploded in that moment he would have rejoiced, and the destruction of his talented hand, for its only true talent was murder. There had always been murder in the world, but telling himself so was no comfort. There was murder, there was rape, there were unspeakable practices, and all of them for the good, the bloody myth, for the Grail, for the Tower. Ah, the Tower. Stood somewhere in the middle of things, so they say, rearing its black grey bulk to the sky, and in his desert-scoured ears the gunslinger heard the faint, sweet sound of his mother's voice. Chiss it, chass it, bring enough to fill your basket. He brushed the song and the sweetness of the song aside. Where are you? He asked. Thank you guys for listening to part 7 of The Gunslinger, and if all goes well, see you tomorrow.